BioWare, as they sometimes do, recently released some statistics for people's choices in Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I'm gonna ignore for a second that means they were secretly tracking everything everyone does in the game this whole time, and just talk about what these stats actually show. Among the interesting results, 60% of people chose to save the racist on Vermeer.
I can't tell the aliens from the animals.
40% of people chose the most boring class in the game.
Nice.
68% of people punched the annoying reporter lady. I actually find that one weirdly high, considering that the good guy choices have the overwhelming majority in almost every other category. I guess she really is just that annoying.
I've had enough of your snide insinuations.
Obviously, the stat that interests me most on this list is the one at the very top. 68% of players chose a male shepherd, just over 2/3. I'm not surprised by this statistic. This is a pretty average split across most games that offer these kinds of options, and generally speaking, it's not as malicious as when, say, Ubisoft does it, where the presented option wasn't supposed to be an option at all, and is instead a cop-out to having to write a story with any kind of grit. Here, the choice is an extremely standard RPG option to give. But, I'm here to tell you that 68% of players made the wrong choice anyway. Hello, I'm Boy. Now I realise I'm fighting an uphill battle here, especially for a franchise people have such deep emotions about, like Mass Effect. People have a well-strengthened bond to their shepherd, and convincing them to part with that guy is going to be a tough sell. But I'm going to try my best. First, let's talk about me and where I'm coming from. Now, personally, I've always defaulted to playing female characters when given the option. I always have. I've never really analysed that in much detail. But I can if you want. Actually, you know what? Yes, pause for a second on the FemShep stuff. Let's analyse that for a bit. When playing games, most people default to picking the same gender that they are, you know, if they have the option. And that's by no means strange. When creating a character that's supposed to embody you in this digital space, it's pretty natural to create a character of your gender. That's the identity you are and identify most with. I've always been a contrarian in this regard. So why? Why do I always pick a female character? Do I secretly wish I was a girl or something? Well, no, I'm pretty comfortable with who I am at the moment, so that's not it. We have to go deeper than that into the way I play and enjoy RPGs. I don't like playing me in games. I'm not very interesting, and plus, I get to play me 24/7. That's life, baby. In RPGs, I think a lot of people pivot towards playing themselves, intentionally or not. They pick choices that they'd pick in real life and create a character that sort of looks like them, and I've always found this to be an inferior experience. When I'm playing a game, I want to feel invested in the world and invested in the character I'm playing. And if that character is just an empty husk that I'm projecting myself into, I don't feel very attached to their journey. A gender flip is a very quick and easy way for me to break that mindset. I'm not a lady. This elf is not me. This elf is a character that I'm controlling. This is also why, especially in BioWare games, I tend to pick the default face. I find custom faces to be really immersion breaking, because ultimately a face made with sliders and options is never going to be as real as a face made by professional artists. If it's an older game like Oblivion where everyone's face just sort of looks like a blob, then that's fine. But if it's a fancier game like Dragon Age 2, a custom face next to all these carefully created and animated companions just sticks out like a sore thumb. To me, anyway, no judgment of your custom hawks, but look at this beard though. So pointy. He's gonna poke someone's eye out with that thing. I mean, I think part of the gender swap too is just the spice of variety. This argument has less merit these days now that we're seeing more female-led action games, but back in the day, oh boy, here's a bunch of AAA titles released in 2007, and here's the ones with a female protagonist. Chell, the silent portal lady, and a remake Lara Croft. That's really it. I wasn't exactly woke on representation as an 8-year-old, but even back then I was tired of the constant stream of angry white dudes. Okay, I think we're done analysing that now. Let's get back to the matter at hand. So FemShep, right? What's up with that? My personal reasons for picking a female character still apply, but Mass Effect is a different beast to tackle, and my reasons for advocating a FemShep run go above and beyond what I've talked about for other games. So, without further delay, let's get into it, shall we? Let's start with the most basic argument that you've probably heard before, just so we can get it out of the way. voice acting. Female Commander Shepard just sounds better. There's no two ways about it. We're comparing veteran voice actor Jennifer Hale, famous for being in basically everything you've ever watched or ever played, to Mark Meer, famous for being Commander Shepard. Now, I could just show you a montage of clips to make this point clear. And I will.
Sneaking up on us like that nearly got you killed.
Sneaking up on us like that nearly got you killed.
What were you thinking? You could have hit the hostage.
What were you thinking? You could have hit the hostage.
For too long, our species has stood apart from the others. Now it's time for us to step up and do our part for the rest of the galaxy. Time to show them what humans are made of.
For too long, our species has stood apart from the others. Now it's time for us to step up and do our part for the rest of the galaxy. Time to show them what humans are made of.
I've had enough of your snide insinuations.
I've had enough of your snide insinuations.
You can expect me to kill you the next time we meet.
You can expect me to kill you the next time we meet.
Our enemy knows we're coming.
When we go into the Traverse, Saren's followers will be waiting for us. But we'll be ready for them, too.
Our enemy knows we're coming. When we go into the Traverse, Saren's followers will be waiting for us. But we'll be ready for them, too.
I saw synthetics. Geth, maybe. Slaughtering people. Butchering them.
I saw synthetics. Geth, maybe. Slaughtering people. Butchering them.
I don't have time for questions. I need the evidence you have against Saren.
I don't have time for questions. I need the evidence you have against Saren.
Making your day, Ambassador.
Making your day, Ambassador.
Saren must be stopped. And I promise you all, we will stop him.
Saren must be stopped. And I promise you all, we will stop him.
I should go.
The PC way to make this argument is to be like, well, both actors do a great job. I just personally prefer Miss Hale's performance. But listen, I'm not going to take the high road on this one. Mark Meer's performance is pretty not good, especially in the first game. I'll admit he gets better with each subsequent game, and by the third does give a pretty decent performance. But here in ME1, woof.
I'm going after Fist. I don't want you getting in my way.
The most notable thing is that the voice is just extremely flat, every line delivered in the same monotone soldier voice. I'll admit that works fine for some parts of the game. Shepard is, after all, supposed to be a professional, but when the same tone is applied to squadmate conversations, or better yet, romantic scenes, it becomes kind of comical. Coupled with the default Shepard in Mass Effect 1's general lack of facial animations for regular conversations, Shepard just comes across as extremely generic soldier man. Whether playing Paragon or Renegade, you don't even need to contrast with a female Shepard to make this point. You can contrast it with Meer's performance later in the series.
You brought me here to confirm what you already know. The Reapers are here.
His dialogue scenes in Mass Effect 3 are much stronger, with a lot more range in his voice, letting the character seem a lot more real. And I don't think Meer is a bad actor, far from it in fact, his range is insane. You probably didn't even notice that he voices a huge amount of characters across the series.
The words this unworthy one speaks are merely observations of the truth.
You don't come here. We shut down machines, break fans.
I am a biotic god.
He's really, really good at doing character voices, to the point that you don't even think about them being the same person. But when it comes to a performance which needs genuine depth, he could use a lot of work. Hale is just so much better at this stuff. She's reading the same lines, but there's so much more personality injected into them, so much so that it breaks through the lackluster facial animations most of the time. And her more dynamic range also makes a Paragon or Renegade playthrough feel way more divergent, where Paragon Shepard is full of emotion and passionate about what's being done.
Not if we lose our humanity in the process. I am out here fighting to stop crap like this.
And a Renegade Shepard is extremely cold and callous.
You know who and what I am. If I want Nirali Bhatia, I can get her.
Standing in sharp contrast to Bro Shep, who ranges from monotone soldier man to slightly angrier monotone soldier man.
Not if we lose our humanity in the process. I'm out there fighting to stop crap like this.
You know who and what I am. If I want Nirali Bhatia, I can get her.
But you, friends, you've probably heard all this before, haven't you? At this point, it's fairly common knowledge within the Mass Effect community. It's generally accepted that Hale gives the better performance, and clearly this is not very convincing to you as you have yet to play a FemShep run. So let's move on, shall we? You see, it's more than just a better performance that makes FemShep unique. It's how that better performance changes your relationship to the game. Mass Effect, and specifically Mass Effect 1, sits on the crossroads between two different types of roleplay. Here's my guess: if you've played Male Shepard across all of the games, then the kind of stilty and monotone performance probably doesn't bother you at all. You might not have even noticed it until I contrasted it with FemShep just there. And that's because you probably don't perceive Shepard in the same way you perceive other characters. Player characters in RPGs are in a strange place when it comes to them as characters. For one thing, as the only character controlled by the player, they exhibit way more agency than anyone else in the plot. For another, since there's typically multiple dialogue options in every conversation, the characterization of the player character is typically left up to the player themselves. But because you can swing wildly between different personalities at the press of a button, the player character is often very hard to buy as a real part of this world. Let's use Fallout New Vegas as our example, since this is a game generally accepted as very well written, but it's also the Fallout game with by far the broadest characterization of the main character. You're given an extremely vague backstory with total room to craft any sort of character you want. The result of this is a compelling role-playing experience for the player, emulating more closely a tabletop type experience, but as a result, nobody's favourite Fallout character is the Courier, because the Courier isn't a character. The Courier is a role-playing toolset that you project a character into. You know, if you want, otherwise you just kind of play yourself. And this is fine. You probably don't even consciously think about it, because we all on some level understand that an RPG protagonist is different from the rest of the characters in the game. After all, we probably spent upwards of 2 hours perfectly crafting them. On the opposite end of this, you have the protagonist of a completely linear game. Let's take I don't know, I just played Mafia for the first time, so let's take Tommy Angelo. Mafia is not an RPG, it has no meaningful story choices, it's a completely linear experience, and with that comes a fully realised character. Tommy has a defined personality and relationships and motivations separate from the player. Most importantly, he has a name. Mass Effect is unique among RPGs, or it was anyway, a lot of games have followed in its path afterwards. It's unique for attempting to hybridise these two approaches. Commander Shepard has a name and has a voice. The reason most RPGs don't have a voice protagonist is that it would be prohibitively expensive and time-consuming. If you have 6 dialogue options, all with totally branching conversations, that's hours and hours and hours of recorded dialogue that an average player may only ever hear a quarter of. It's just not worth the time and money. Mass Effect still has a crapload of branching dialogue, but it's notably trimmed down from a more open, player-driven RPG. All of the Mass Effect games have a linear, highly cinematic plotline to follow. You can change the small details, but the big picture story is the same across everyone's game. A voiced protagonist theoretically makes the player way more of a character, but that's not immediately the case. For an example that followed in the footsteps of Mass Effect, Fallout 4's Sole Survivor is a voiced protagonist with a very similar dialogue system, but they're a very hard character to relate to because the game is still written like an older, player-driven experience, and also it's just kind of badly written generally. Mummy and Daddy Vault Dweller have no concrete personality traits. They're blank slates designed to be your avatar in the game world. In theory, a voice makes them a stronger character, but in practice, all it's really doing is making the experience slightly more immersive so that there's actual conversations and not half conversation, half text box. Enter Shepard. Shepard in his monotone voice will say whatever you want him to say with little characterization added. He's a blank slate that you can project a character onto in the same way an unvoiced protagonist would be. And that's fine. Shepard, he gets the job done, because the real draw of Mass Effect is the squad mates, is the world, is the grand overarching plot. But, what if I told you there's a better way? With a better performance, Shepard becomes a real believable part of this world, especially when paired with the default face, though not exclusively. Your thinking about the game changes from what would I do to what would Shepard do, and that is a subtle but dramatic difference to your engagement with the game world. Playing as FemShep moves the dial away from New Vegas and towards Mafia on this completely foolproof and perfect scale I've made. This is a hard one to really demonstrate in a video because there's nothing I can show you to prove this point. It's a feeling built up from playing the game. The relationships formed feel more real. The dramatic speeches feel more impactful. The stress comes across more naturally. You just eventually stop thinking about Shepard as a player creation and start thinking about her as a person. Let's take a close read of one scene to try and demonstrate. Mass Effect 2, the first meeting with the elusive man. Similar to a point I made in a previous video, two different actors will naturally have a different take on the same lines, and in a game with this much dialogue, it's likely that a lot of the direction is left up to the actors to interpret. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, this resulted in two quite vastly separate characterizations for each of the optional protagonists. Back here in Mass Effect, the difference is more subtle. Let's start with Bro Shep.
Commander Shepard.
Elusive man. I thought we'd be meeting face to face.
Unnecessary precaution. Not unusual for people who know what you and I know.
You might be the reason I'm still alive, but that doesn't mean I trust you.
You need to put your personal feelings aside. Humanity is up against the greatest threat of our brief existence.
The Reapers.
Good to see your memory's still intact. How are you feeling?
You need to earn the right to ask me those kinds of questions.
Cerberus isn't as evil as you believe. You and I are on the same side. We just have different methods.
Cut to the chase. What are the Reapers doing that made you decide to bring me back?
Here the dialogue is quite utilitarian, as is most of the dialogue. He's a soldier, he doesn't display much outward emotion. He doesn't trust the elusive man, much like the player, but that's mostly driven by the dialogue and not by the performance. Now, FemShep.
Commander Shepard.
Elusive man. I thought we'd be meeting face to face.
Unnecessary precaution. Not unusual for people who know what you and I know.
You might be the reason I'm still alive, but that doesn't mean I trust you.
You need to put your personal feelings aside. Humanity is up against the greatest threat of our brief existence.
The Reapers.
Good to see your memory's still intact. How are you feeling?
You need to earn the right to ask me those kinds of questions.
Cerberus isn't as evil as you believe. You and I are on the same side. We just have different methods.
Cut to the chase. What are the Reapers doing that made you decide to bring me back?
It's the same dialogue, but there's so much more depth we can take from it, even with these minor lines. Shepard here is still keeping the air of professionalism, but there's just a hint of seething and annoyance in her tone. You can hear it in the way she draws out the words at the end of sentences. It adds fantastic depth to the lines, and it makes the conversation flow better with Martin Sheen's fantastic performance as the elusive man. These conversations have more weight to them because there's emotion coming from both sides, not just one. I contend this is why FemShep has such a fanbase and is so overrepresented in Mass Effect fan art compared to Bro Shep. It's not because she's more popular. We can in fact factually prove that she's not. It's because she leaves a stronger impression. People draw fan art of characters they like. Wow, someone called Holmes, I've cracked the case. Generally, fan art of RPG protagonists is based on that player's creation, which is why my Instagram is full of pirate satyr doodles. Mass Effect is unique amongst even other voiced RPGs in how much of the fan art is based on the default player models. We can see that in the way that we talk about FemShep. She has a name, she's always had a name, she's FemShep. We talk about her like she's a character separate from the Shepard on the cover, in a way that's almost never done for male-female versions of protagonists. And I think BioWare noticed this. There's a notable trend in their games after Mass Effect of continuing to take characterization of the player character away from the player with all of their subsequent releases. In Mass Effect 1, Shepard will almost only ever speak when prompted by the player. In Mass Effect 2, there are several lines spoken outside of player control. In Mass Effect 3, there are many lines spoken outside of player control. Dragon Age Inquisition goes to ridiculous lengths to combine the concrete player protagonist with player choice, with 4 different names, 4 different voices, and 6 different backstories depending on your character creation choices. Andromeda swings the opposite direction. It even rejects the Paragon Renegade system entirely to have a more concrete protagonist, and it gives you a first name if you stick with the default options. And Anthem, well, I didn't play Anthem. I don't think anyone played Anthem, so we can probably just skip it, right? Sure, you're not going to mind if I skip Anthem, are you? No, it's fine. Mass Effect Andromeda is the most interesting one to me, as the customization in that game genuinely feels like an afterthought, like the game was designed only to give you the option of sibling, but at some point a higher up said, no, this is a Mass Effect game, you need to have a custom protagonist. As a tangent, if you didn't like Andromeda, I'd recommend trying it again with this in mind. Load up a game with a new default Sarah or Scott and enter the game with this mindset. You may just have a better time with it. The real question is this actually better? And obviously that's up to you, but I think there's an interesting case to be made for both, and that Mass Effect 1 is the perfect game to decide because it offers both. You've probably gathered which side I lean to by now, but there's actually people who actively dislike Mass Effect for this deeper characterization of the main character, who say that it is bad roleplay. What is roleplay anyway? How we define roleplay is important for how we decide what good or bad roleplay means. If we take it at the most literal level, then any video game could be considered roleplay. In Mafia, you play the role of Tommy Angelo, and yet we wouldn't consider Mafia a role-playing game. So clearly the term roleplay means something different. We all know what an RPG looks like. It has branching dialogue, it has a leveling system, it has different classes available. It probably has a bunch of companions that can travel with you. One of these things on its own does not make an RPG, but not all are required for it to be an RPG. So RPGs exist in some sort of amalgam of these things in a way that's sort of accurate to their roots. Early RPGs, at least Western RPGs anyway, are almost entirely rooted in Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, a lot of famous early RPGs are explicitly set in the D&D universe. D&D is a game with a ton of rules, but whether you actually play to those rules is up to the discretion of the players. Nobody really bats an eye if you ignore spell components, for example. There's an idea that good roleplay should try as closely as possible to emulate the total freedom that tabletop roleplay offers. In D&D, the only limit of the story is yours and the DM's imagination. That's how you end up with a satyr pirate carrying around the shotgun of infamous chicken thief Colonel Sanders. If a game doesn't at least try to emulate that level of freedom, then it is to some people a bad RPG, and so, paradoxically, FemShep's better performance makes the game worse, because it leaves less room for player characterization. To me, this idea of RPGs doesn't play to the strengths of the medium. We aren't actually at the point where we can program infinity, so until we reach holodeck technology, a digital RPG will never be able to reach the freedom of a tabletop RPG. But instead of viewing that as a weakness, I'd prefer to pivot to things video games can do especially well. One of the biggest strengths of narrative games is the way that players are instinctively bonded to the protagonist. By being a character that you spend almost 100% of your time with, even if they aren't strongly characterized, as the person you control, they hold a special place in the narrative. Most games don't do anything especially notable with this effect, but there are more unique examples popping up, the most infamous example in recent history being the way The Last of Us Part 2 pivots between its two leads. In many ways, by offering a fully customizable protagonist, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot as a writer. Players will still feel that bond to their PC, but the writer has no control over that bond. There's no room to get creative with it, as any characterization has been handed over to the player. In games like this, the player character is almost an afterthought to the story being told, just a vessel that the player engages the world with. And that is at odds with the strength of the medium. You've probably been waiting for this one. It's time for us to talk about the Red Dead Redemption 2. If this game is an RPG, is a discussion and a half, let me tell you, because it does tick quite a few of the boxes, but let's put that aside. RDR2 is centred on the characterisation of Arthur Morgan, and it uses player agency to creatively enhance that characterisation. The way morality is gamified, players can choose between a brutal and noble version of this character, but each is made more meaningful by offering the choice. Red Dead is a useful example here because I'm not saying that Mass Effect would be a better game if it was a completely linear experience with a default FemShep. Choices are key to Mass Effect. My point is that those choices are given more impact if they're anchored with a solid protagonist. The existence of Renegade Shepard makes Paragon Shepard more meaningful and vice versa, but only if you believe in Shepard's personhood, if you perceive her as a character in her own right, and not as you. So, why don't you take a walk on the wild side with me? Take a gander at a series you probably like, and enter it with a new mindset. You might just find that you love it even more. DLC was being real cheeky with what it was doing, because Javik, I agree, feels essential to Mass Effect 3.
In Mass Effect 1 and 2, your DLC crew aren't essential at all. They're completely disposable.
No, you can completely skip them.
Yeah, however, I do think that, again, in that era, that's actually quite a cool DLC. Entire new crewmates. It's not just like a suit pack.